All right, everyone. I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for your time this morning. We'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. As you can see from the screen, it's Microsoft 365, what to use, parenthesis and when, close parenthesis. We're presenting this today in partnership between Centric Training and Oakwood Systems Group. My name is Jesse Marshall. I am the Microsoft 365 Service Line Lead at Oakwood Systems, and your presenter today will be the multi-talented Nate Chamberlain from Centric Training. I'd like to thank real quick Nate, Justin, and the entire Centric team for the opportunity to co-host this exciting webinar today. And I want to thank everybody for joining. Real quick, a bit about us. Oakwood is a team of Microsoft consultants with 10 gold competencies across the entire Microsoft stack, from email and Active Directory all the way through at full Azure managed services and advanced security. We are based in the Midwest, but we work coast to coast, just like our esteemed partner Centric here. And as one of the few Microsoft partners with an advanced specialization in adoption and change management in M365, we do understand that your Office 365, or Microsoft 365 as they want us to call it now, is as much about enabling people to do their jobs and be productive as it is about deploying a new technology platform. In fact, some may argue even more so. To that end, we hope that today's webinar helps you guys get a little closer to that goal of enabling yourselves and your teams to be more successful using 365 to get your work done. We have a quick bit of housekeeping here, a couple points. We will have Q&A at the end of the presentation after Nate gets done with his presentation and his slides, and we welcome questions throughout, or you can hold them to the end if you're like me and like to rapid fire all at the very end. This is a Teams live event, so all communication from our attendees will be via the chat panel. Everyone has their mics muted. Patience also is a virtue here. If you guys do ask a question, we sometimes get a delay of up to 10 or 15 seconds between the time a question is asked and when we reply, so please be patient because we will get to it. Also, if you have an issue hearing or with the video, please let us know via the chat as well. And at the end, we will send a link to this recording, as well as ways to get in contact with your hosts or our extended teams in case you have follow-up questions or need to run something by us. I'll come back on towards the end of Nate's presentation and we'll do some Q&A, but without further ado, I'd like to introduce Justin Ruby and Nate Chamberlain from Centric. Take it away, Justin. One moment,
All
guys.
right.
There he is.
I think I got it figured out. Sorry about that. The bottom of the screen came up and I couldn't get to my mute button, but it was there on the top. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. As Jesse mentioned, my name is Justin Ruby, and as I went through the registration list, I saw a lot of familiar companies. I saw a lot of familiar people that have been here to Centric, but I also saw a lot of newer folks also. So to give you a little history about myself, I'm the Partner Enablement Manager here at Centric Training, and I work with companies like Oakwood to bring these value-added type of events. I also partner with them on Microsoft 365 offerings. So we'll bring some of our services to Oakwood, and then Oakwood would bring those out to their customers. So we help them with the training and adoption piece of Microsoft 365. For those of you that are not familiar with Centric Training, so we are the Midwest premier IT training company, and we've been around for just over 31 years. We have two locations. We have one in St. Louis, and we have another here in Kansas City, which is where Nate and I and Jesse and Mickey all are. We serve a nationwide audience, as Jesse mentioned earlier, and have been known to train internationally as well. And quite frankly, with virtual instruction today, I mean, I think we could be training out on the moon right now. So it's nice to have those capabilities and work with customers all across the world. We are a Microsoft Gold partner as well as CompTIA, EC Council, Citrix, Red Hat. The list kind of goes on and on. So if you're in a technical role and you're looking for some technical type training, be sure to start with Centric. If we don't have it, then hopefully we can find a resource for you. So before introducing our speaker today, I'd like to encourage you, as Jesse mentioned, to ask as many questions you have throughout it. It's not very often that we have experts like Nate, like Jesse, and I'll introduce you to Mickey as well. Mickey Brewer is one of our moderators here today, and Mickey has been with Centric now for about 2.5 years. And I know there's people on this call today that are familiar with who Mickey is. She's been in your environment and trained in your environment. But she has been working with Microsoft 365 since its inception, She's our Microsoft 365 instructor lead here at Centric, and so the team you see in front of you right now, she helps manage that group and write the right curriculum for our Microsoft 365 customers. So I'm really glad to have her here, especially since I'm a moderator. She knows a lot more stuff about this M365 stuff than I do. So as you ask your questions in the Q&A section here, know that I'm not the only one to answer it. Mickey's there to definitely help answer some of those questions as Nate presents. So we've highlighted some of our, here on the next slide, we've highlighted some of our most popular Microsoft 365 classes. So no matter where you are on the journey with Microsoft 365, Centric should have the right class for you. And if you don't know what the right class is, then by all means, reach out to one of your representatives and we'll make sure that you get lined up with the right course that fits for you. So we can come to you for training. We can deliver any training virtually today, or you can attend any of these public classes that you see there. Or if attending, and I do hear this quite a bit, you know, live classes sometimes just aren't convenient for your schedule. Centric is really excited to announce that we do have a new Microsoft 365 e-training portal, and where you can go in and train at your own pace. And the thing that I love about it is has these accountability tools in it. So if you're an administrator, you can make sure that all the employees are following the learning path that you gave them, and it gives them a deadline and all that kind of stuff to make sure they have that completed training by, or that training completed by. So it's a really good way to partner with all of your associates and make sure that everybody's on the same page with Microsoft 365. So, all right, I'll come back on at the end and we'll do like about a 5 to 6 minute video on that e-training portal. So we'll do that right before the open Q&A, as Jesse mentioned earlier. So what I do want to encourage everyone to do is, while that video is taking place, is to think about some of the questions that you would have for experts like Mickey, like Nate, and like Jesse around Microsoft 365, around migrations, all that kind of stuff that's on your mind. And hopefully we can get your questions answered and have some live conversation between you and those 3 experts. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Nate Chamberlain. Nate is freaking awesome, and our customers absolutely love him. The Centric team loves what he's doing. He joined our Centric M365 team in November as a Microsoft 365 training specialist. He is a Microsoft certified trainer, has been awarded the Microsoft MVP for 2 years running for his contributions to the tech community. He most recently co-authored the MS 700 exam guide to help prepare readers for earning the Microsoft 365 Teams administrator certification. So really honored to have him here. Nate, thank you for being in here. And so everybody doesn't have to listen to me anymore. I'll turn it right over to you now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Justin, and thank you everybody for taking the time today to learn a little bit more about Microsoft 365 with me. Just to go back to our first slide here for a reminder, this is Microsoft 365, what to use and when. We're primarily focused today on your personal productivity as well as your team productivity. So we're going to think about things in those 2 buckets as we go through the content. And primarily we're focusing not on the entire Microsoft 365 suite, but on 3 of the big players, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. So we'll just skip through there a little bit. There we go. So we've basically broken today's presentation into 2 pieces. First, we're just going to kind of review what each of those big players can do in the Microsoft 365 stack, and then we'll talk about when to use which. And that's going to be specific on scenarios that you might find yourself in, or situations in which you need a tool but you're not sure which one could work best. Now, as we're going through that specific piece, keep in mind that there is no one singular answer, and in fact, sometimes it comes down to your preference. So if I do say you could use Teams or SharePoint, I'll show you, how you might use either of them to fit a certain need. But keep in mind that ultimately it's going to come down to you, and there's no wrong answer. There's just often a better answer for your specific team. All right, so starting out with, what are they? Again, we're focused on OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams today, and I'll just briefly introduce each, and then we'll go a little bit deeper before we get much further. OneDrive is your storage space. The most important thing about OneDrive in the context of today's presentation is to remember that's for you. Okay, and then that's where you can share and collaborate on docs. that really simplifies the tool. There's so much you could do, above and beyond just that, but at its core, it is your storage space where you share with your team and with external people and collaborate on docs in real time using modern collaboration tools. Now, the next one is SharePoint, and some of you may be using SharePoint to its fullest. Some of you may just be using it on the background of Teams. No matter how you're using it, it can be used for org-wide communications and knowledge, thinking about your intranet needs, as well as knowledge organization and information management throughout the enterprise. And it gives you a website-like experience that can bring in all of the other M365 tools. Not specifically OneDrive or Teams, but we're thinking more in that case, bringing in Forms as an integration and bringing in Planner and some of these other tools that we're coming to love and use more regularly in our day-to-day business with each other. The last one is Teams, and Teams is really great for your team or group-based collaboration. Sometimes those teams are time-locked and we're thinking, okay, we just need something to work through this project. Sometimes they're forever, and we're gonna intend on using that for our department for the foreseeable future. So it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other, but those are two ways to kind of think about it. And then it's also our communication tool. Historically, we used Skype for Business quite a bit, and some of you may still be using Skype for Business. But Teams is kind of taking that place, and we're using it for chat and scheduling meetings and live events, just like this one you're attending today. And then the calls piece as well, which isn't so much always telephony. Some of you may absolutely be using it for telephony, but it could also just be audio and video calls. Okay, and then also, just like with SharePoint, we can bring in M365 integrations for Teams, thinking again, bringing in like Planner, bringing in Forms, and much more. So let's get a little bit deeper though. So OneDrive, remember, we can create and share and collaborate on our docs. It's kind of our place. Throughout all three of these products, though, we're getting the same feeling of modern collaboration, where with OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams, when we're editing docs in the cloud, we're able to utilize these features and benefit from them as we go through our processes. So I kind of broke this down into 4 pieces to think about. Maybe it's a departure from our classic shared network drive collaboration experience. But with M365 and all 3 of the apps we're covering, we get co-authoring, meaning we can all be in the same document at the same time, making changes simultaneously. I can see the changes you're making 3 states away, perhaps in real time as they're happening, so that you don't have to make some changes, attach it to an email, send it to the rest of us, and then we're playing this game of attachments and who has the most recent version. So that's really changed the way we collaborate. And then autosave, just knowing that if I do lose my internet connection or my computer crashes right now, autosave has me protected, meaning the last time that I took a break in typing, even if it was just for 1 second, that document is saved. And when I reload on a spare machine, or if I have to go to the hotel business center and use their computer, or whatever your situation may be, you're good. In fact, if you just open up that file on your phone using one of the mobile apps that's a component to these apps that we're covering, you'll also have it there and be able to continue editing. Okay, not that we want to be editing, major documents on our phone, but who knows? All right, and then we'll go into version history and track changes. So I kind of think of these together. For example, specifically when you're working with Word docs and M365, and we're used to that track changes that gives you the red markup whenever things are removed, or it shows you when pieces were added to a document. That track changes is actually on by default and baked into version history. So if you open up, for example, a Word doc inside of OneDrive and you go into the version history for it, you'll see in the right-hand panel that you can also turn on or off the track changes. So we don't have to worry about remembering that before we start using this modern collaboration. We'll have it no matter what. And then the last piece there, we can have unique permissions, meaning that specifically in OneDrive, when you're thinking about that, that's your storage space. So you get to choose who can access which file and who can access which folder and how participative they can be. Are they just consuming, or are they completely modifying and potentially deleting? All right, so thinking about those permissions, there are several different ways that you control that in OneDrive specifically. So now going kind of back to the OneDrive box, if you will, here. But the different link settings that we get for any file, basically we can share with anyone, we can share with people in our company, we can share with those who have existing access or specific people. So when we're thinking about people in our company, we're basically just generating a link that anybody could forward to anybody else as long as they're signed in with your organization's account. So that's one of our abilities to collaborate with others using that organization link. But if we want more granular control and we want only specific people, meaning if you sent me a link, it can only work for me and I can't forward it to Mickey and it works for Mickey. If we want to prevent that kind of sharing, then we want to use specific people. So it is locked down to exact identities that you're specifying. But otherwise, with the one that you see checked on my screen now, that anyone with a link, that's a public link where I could create a folder, put some handouts in it, put that in this webinar right now, and then you would have access to all of those files, even though you're not logged in. All right, and then OneDrive may be cloud-based, but I also want to just mention that, when we're thinking about, oh, he just said I could lose my internet. It gets us thinking about these kind of scenarios, right? OneDrive and SharePoint are cloud-based, and we can use Teams offline a little bit if we have the desktop version. However, we don't really have to worry about it because remember, we do have autosave, but there's also this really great feature called sync, and you'll actually find sync in OneDrive and SharePoint. And you'll see the same button in Teams, but for those of you that don't know, and I'll mention it later, a little teaser here, but Teams uses SharePoint for document manage. So even though it feels like we're working with files inside of Teams and that's a specific location, it's actually supported by and operated by SharePoint. So we see sync in both places, or if you think about it in the extended way, in all three places. And that allows us to have files offline, meaning I lose my internet right now. I have the most recent version that's synced to my computer. I'm basically keeping a local copy, but it's syncing to that cloud version. We're not duplicating, we're just making convenient offline access. So when you do that, basically you get a little node inside of your normal file explorer, and you can see all of your OneDrive files as if they were in your downloads folder. And they have 3 different statuses. Now, by default, those are going to be online only. So you'd have to do something like open the file to make it on this device. It downloads it once and then continues the sync until you tell it to stop. And then always available is just an intentional download. So instead of opening the file, we just say, I want these 25 files to be available offline always if I were to lose my internet or something. Or going to a place without reception, or my computer crashes, or something I have to start over. But whatever disaster happens, we're thinking about these 3 statuses. If it's online only and you do lose your internet, you're not going to be able to access it. But either of these other 2, you'll be fine. All right, now moving on to SharePoint. We've just covered OneDrive, kind of how it's your space, you control it, it's your own control over permissions and all of that. But with SharePoint now, we're shifting the conversation to us, right? This is our space now. And the core features of SharePoint are listed in front of you there, but it's sites, lists and libraries, and then that modern collaboration piece that we just talked about with OneDrive. Now, as we get into each of these, it may seem like we're spending less time talking about them, but it's because OneDrive has a lot of the same features that you see in SharePoint. And in fact, OneDrive, your OneDrive, is actually a SharePoint site. I would say in disguise, but it's a little obvious too. It's not a fully featured SharePoint site, but SharePoint really does power all 3 apps that we're talking about today. So the modern collaboration I just discussed in OneDrive, where we get the co-authoring, the version history, and all of that, also applies to SharePoint. So when you're in a document library inside of SharePoint working with your colleagues, we still get co-authoring, version history, and we can manage sharing and permissions. So the sites piece of that is basically we're looking to create website-like experiences to either communicate across our entire organization, perhaps, or it could be still meant for collaboration with perhaps a smaller group. Those are called team sites. So one of those 2 templates. Now I do want to jump out and just show you an example here real quick. So let me go to my sites and we'll go to the landing. Okay, and the landing, this is a communication site template, meaning that it's just meant to be used to push information out mostly, and we're not really looking to create a dialogue here or have people come and complete work here. It's more, here's the resources you need, the quick links, the HR stuff, the training videos, the news across the organization, but it feels and it looks like a website, right? We've got these big hero web parts, and we've even brought in Yammer for social enterprise, and we've brought in social public, which is Twitter in this case. So you don't have to keep it in the M365 ecosystem either with certain integrations. So that's kind of a communication site template. We get the global nav. It feels very much like an intranet. Okay, now the alternative site type is going to be a team site. So for example, this is the Market project team. And you can see it feels a little bit different already. It looks like we have a planner plan here that we can interact with. It's fully interactive, just like in Planner. I can complete my tasks, work through my tasks, change whoever's assigned to them, all without leaving SharePoint. And I get this left-hand navigation instead of that global nav. And you can see they've even embedded like a countdown. They've got milestones, their own documents for this team, so on and so forth. And so this is a large reason why we're having this webinar, and why this question comes up is because as I'm saying some of this, in the back of your mind somewhere, you may already be asking yourself, okay, but isn't that what I use Teams for? I use Teams to bring in these other services, and I can kind of have my work go, or my team go there to collaborate. But here you are showing me a SharePoint site where I can do a lot of the same stuff. And that's why we get into this gray area and start having this discussion. So there is, again, no wrong or right answer. This is just the option if you did want to combine multiple components onto a single page to create a website-like experience, this is probably the route you would go. Now, I will say that you could also embed this very same page that I'm looking at, scrolling up and down. We can embed that in a team. So you can use SharePoint pages inside of Teams. Mostly you're just going to lose your navigation. We get everything inside the page content. So in addition to sites and pages like we were just looking at, we also get lists and libraries. Now, these are some of the most heavily used apps inside of SharePoint, and lists is also known as Microsoft lists, where we can use those for our team inside of SharePoint, or we can even embed them inside of Teams, or we can use them by ourselves, which save to our OneDrive site. So you can have your own list. Okay, now libraries, as an individual, you get your OneDrive library. That's a library in a way. But on SharePoint, we can have multiple document libraries, and we go there to interact with files much in the same way as we do in our OneDrive, meaning we get all the modern collaboration elements. But now when we're sharing and controlling those permissions, it's our site owners or our group owners who are going to be managing those permissions and making sure that the right people have access. We also want to keep in mind that when we're working in SharePoint or Teams libraries, that permissions are shared across the whole group, meaning that we all have edit access. Unless some changes have been made on the SharePoint site. But by default, we all have access to edit the files, to contribute to the success of the team, if you will, by having that shared control. Okay, and that means we can all share stuff too. So we don't want to use SharePoint for anything private that really should be controlled by us, but really more for our team. And then for lists, lists are really just a data warehouse, if you will. Warehouse maybe is not the best word here, but let me show you an example. For example, this is a site called Sales and Marketing, and they have a product list. And at first it feels like, oh, so you mean it's online Excel? Not quite. In fact, it can do quite a bit more. So in addition to setting up rules and reminders and things based on the list contents, like perhaps you want to be reminded based on a date field value in the list, you can do that and build your own little workflow in no time at all. And there's also integrations with Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power BI. So you can visualize your list data, you can create workflows off of your list data, and put it into apps as well. But I just want to share one of my favorite features that really sets this apart from something like Excel. We can also comment on individual items. So for example, when I click the comment icon on one row of data in this list, it pulls it up so I can view it isolated from the rest. I can edit it all right here. Instead of going horizontally, I can go vertically, and we can have a conversation. Whoops, I turn on caps lock there. And I can say this is awesome. So we have an ongoing conversation about each row that we're working through in this data set. Okay, and this is a product list, but keep this in mind as a potential solution for forms as well, where we create and customize forms. This one looks quite simple, but imagine like your travel reimbursement requests and your procurement requests, asset checkout, check-in, anything that you're currently using digital forms for could actually be feeding a SharePoint list that then kicks off workflows. So thinking big picture there, but some ideas. Right now, team, the last piece that we're covering today is the communication wrapper, if you will, that goes around a lot of these M365 services and abilities. So in addition to all these modern collaboration tools and ideas that we're thinking about and bringing together, we get meetings and we get chat and this Outlook integration for our calendar that basically is working to help us accomplish a single context from which we work. Now, Teams is basically broken into two components where we have that communication that we only get through Teams, meetings, chats, and calls. And then we get collaboration, which is the piece that kind of gets gray sometimes and makes it a little confusing to know which one is the right tool for any specific situation. So with the collaboration, we're thinking about Teams as our shared digital workspace. You wouldn't really have a team by yourself. Doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, you can, but it's maybe not going to work like you think it will. But you can have that shared digital workspace that you work through problems or through issues or tasks or product launches or project planning or whatever the case may be with another group of people. A team is just a group. Okay, and then we bring in those M365 integrations like lists, thinking about that same concept where we have that shared, not worksheet, but like a database of sorts that we're tracking maybe clients or vendors or partners or resources as a team, and we share that list. And then we bring in Power Automate, or we bring in Power BI, or any number of tools to help us manipulate and work through that as a team. Okay, so I do want to just bring attention to the fact that one of the most important integrations of the day that we're going to be talking about is SharePoint and Teams working together. And I put and OneDrive in there because it's a big player as well. But I want you to really remember at least that Teams and SharePoint don't work separately. You can have SharePoint by itself, but if you have Teams, you do have SharePoint. It's not an option, if you will. So when you create a new team, or when you're given a team, if you have a request process, you also get a SharePoint site. You can't have a team without SharePoint. And that SharePoint power really is the document management piece. We don't have to have the sites. We don't have to build those out. We don't have to know anything about any of that. Most important thing is just understanding the document piece. So even if you use nothing else in SharePoint, you're at least using and benefiting from that modern collaboration that SharePoint document libraries provide. So this diagram, I think, really helps with understanding the structure. So if you do have a team such as Team A, every single team always has a general channel. Now, real quick on that, teams, like I said, are just a group of people. That's all they are, really. And then your channels are the topics or the projects, the focus areas that you and that team share. So for example, this one's not that great. It's general, channel 1 and channel 2. Hopefully we know what that means. But realistically, it could be general, and you could have marketing, then it could be design, that could be image or branding, or if you're HR, it could be general and then recruitment, and then maybe you've got benefits. I can't think of all the HR things, but use your imagination in your role. And it helps when you're thinking about channel planning to think about, how would I organize this if it were just a bunch of files and we needed to put it on a shared network drive? So we always get general, which is kind of the catch-all if it doesn't fit into something. But then how would you organize your conversations that you have? What are the topics that you're talking about heavy on a regular basis with your colleagues? Or what are the files that you're managing already? How are you organizing those? And then often those translate well into being channels. And a channel, in addition to just being a document storage place, which we're kind of alluding to here, is also a place where we're going to collect meetings and collect conversations. So not only do we have the files about that topic, we're able to have that communication wrapper or the channel conversation about that same topic isolated from the rest of our channel conversations. We're trying to organize not just files anymore with modern collaboration. We're organizing how we spend our time with meetings, where those resources go, how we piece together our communication as a whole, as a team. And then, of course, we always have that files, at least as well. So just to show you real quick, we'll come back to that, but I just want to show you a team to illustrate this a little better than a diagram. Okay, so let's go to the market project team, which is the same team site you just saw a moment ago. They also have a team. So in their team, they have general, they have design, digital assets web, go-to-market plan, and research and development. Okay, and in any one of those channels, everybody has access who's part of that team. These channels do not have unique permissions. Basically, whoever's in the team gets to access all of them, just like if you did have a shared network drive, everybody who's probably part of a security group has access to all the folders inside the parent folder, right? So think about it kind of like that. But then we go to research and development to specifically talk about research and development. And that's what we're looking at here is the post feed or the channel conversations. Okay, now in addition to post, we always have files for every channel. And when we go back to the diagram, you'll see that these files are actually a dedicated folder, in this case called research and development or whatever the channel name is inside of that SharePoint site. Okay, so all of these files are specific to research and development. And we'll keep going on here, but every channel also gets a wiki or a wiki, however you say that. And the wiki is just a knowledge resource that you can create for your team. It's not searchable, so keep that in mind. And just a quick recommendation on that, use OneNote instead of the wiki. And OneNote is searchable, it's much more mobile, it's got a lot more capabilities. And when we're thinking about wikis or any kind of knowledge resource, searchability is key, right? So you can use the wiki, but if it's not too late, go ahead and click that plus sign, use OneNote instead. Okay, now in this particular case, we do have 2 additional tabs. Now in Teams, we're able to extend the capabilities of any particular channel or focus area, if you will, and add these other apps. Like remember in the team site for the Market Project team, we had a planner plan right there on the home page. Here's a planner plan right inside of Teams trying to load. I'll give it a moment there. Okay, so once it's loaded, then we can interact with it just like we could in Planner itself or on our SharePoint page, right? We're just bringing it to one place. And that's kind of how all of this comes together. When we're thinking about modern collaboration, we want to create an easy, stress-free process, not just for ourselves, but for our teammates too. And by bringing in Planner to Teams, we're saying instead of, hey, here's a link to our Planner plan, please go and check for your tasks. Instead of having to click that link in an email, that takes us from Outlook to Planner, and the entire wrapper changes, the navigation is different, it feels different, and honestly, we feel like we're kind of hopping back and forth a lot. Instead of doing that, we're bringing it to one place, and we always have our navigation on the left. We still have our Teams wrapper with easy access to our chat for frequent communications. We still have a very streamlined and understandable wrapper for every single channel, meaning that even if I'm on the Planner plan, this is familiar to me. I know that we can also talk about it on posts, and I know that I have files here. Even if we don't have Planner on every channel, this stays the same if it's familiar as we navigate throughout. So that's the idea of reducing context switching. And then one more integration here on this particular channel, Power BI. So if you are using Power BI for data visualization and reporting, you again don't have to send a link or post a link in the channel conversation to your report. You can actually just embed it right inside of your channel where the topic is relevant. And now once again, we have a fully interactive report right inside of our team channel without having to click out. All right, so just imagine that the possibilities truly are endless as we're extending these channels or focus areas for your team. In fact, you can get an idea of what you could add right here. So lots of third-party integrations if you're not a government tenant. If you use websites like procurement systems, HR portals, whatever it is, you can embed absolutely any website. So there's a website add-in, once again, with the idea of keeping the Teams wrapper, but embedding and bringing those into one window or one experience.
And Nate, sorry to jump in here, but I know for me, being able to embed the intranet inside of Teams with using the Viva connections, which just came out a couple weeks ago for the folks on the phone, has also been kind of a game changer for the folks that have showed it. If you guys have an intranet they built in SharePoint Online, it can now be embedded inside of Teams as well with a little app on the left-hand side for your org.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exciting stuff for sure. Let me show you real quick. It looks like. I would say quick and then it takes its time. Okay, we'll let that, oh, there it goes.
Sort of.
Great.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay, so this is an example of my personal dev tenant. And so we still get that same left-hand navigation. We've been talking about extending like channels, and we're adding maybe SharePoint pages or libraries or Power BI or Planner. We're bringing those all into channels for specific focus area discussions. But if you do have like an org-wide intranet that you're using SharePoint for, we use Viva Connections to add another node over here. So in addition to your normal activity, chat, Teams, calendar, all of that, you can add your intranet. So in my case, I put the landing as my intranet, and you can put your own custom logo there. And then basically you're able to interact with and use SharePoint to its fullest once again, but inside of Teams. We still get our search bar, we still get all of our left-hand navigation, and we have one less thing to click out to open another tab or another window. All right, we'll let that keep loading, but we'll go on. All right, so going back to thinking about those files then. So we talked a little bit about teams and channels. Those channels then have folders and in SharePoint. So every single time you create a channel, like channel 1, as soon as you name it that, over in SharePoint in the same site, in the same library, it creates a new folder with that same name. So you'll have a one-for-one match with every channel to a folder in SharePoint, and that's what's supporting that on the back end. In Teams, we don't see that it's really a folder. We just see our files for that channel, but on the back end, it truly is a folder inside of the SharePoint site. Now, there are private channels as well. I'm not going to get too deep on that unless somebody has a question. Be sure to put that in the Q&A. I'd love to talk more about it. Private channels have a lot of implications and things you should consider before you go down that road. And one of those just happens to be if you create a private channel, it creates an entirely separate SharePoint site. So you can't move from one to the other navigation-wise unless you use like just a regular URL or something to try to trick the user a little bit. So private channels do have to have entirely separate SharePoint sites, and that's because private channels are going to have separate membership. Remember, every channel usually inherits or uses the same group of people that the team wrapper or the box would be, like the security group on your shared network drive example. But you can create private channels that use a subgroup of members from the parent team. That's important to remember too. Your subgroup means that you cannot invite people from team B if they're not part of team A. So it has to be someone from the parent. Okay, and then just real quick, the OneDrive piece. Remember I said SharePoint and then TinyRow and OneDrive. The OneDrive piece here is that for all of your chats, your one-on-one chats or your group chats, those are all using OneDrive to support any attached files that you share. So let's say there's a file on your desktop, use the attach button, send it in a chat to 1 or 70 people. And then in OneDrive, the first time you share a file like that, it creates a folder that's called Microsoft Teams Chat Files. And it takes care of the sharing for you. So whoever you're sending it to gets edit access by default. Now you can modify that. We're not getting into that today, but just remember that when you are attaching files in a chat, the recipients are automatically given edit access, and you can control that from your OneDrive. All right, so once again, when we're thinking about Teams and bringing all these integrations together to create this really magnificent collaboration tool for ourselves and our team members, the main thing on this slide to remember is that single context. What can you do to reduce the number of times people are jumping out and refreshing their attention because they have a whole new frame of context to look through? We're trying to keep everything in Teams when we can. And then, of course, there are times where it makes sense to go entirely to a different app, such as Planner, if we need the full experience. And there are things that are not yet replicated in the Teams version of things where it would make sense to want to click out to get the full abilities. For example, just real quick, on the Files tab for any channel, when you click the New button, you have your standard options for Word, Excel, PowerPoint, so on and so forth. However, if you wanted to modify that new menu for a SharePoint site, which we're seeing inside of Teams, remember, you'd have to go out to SharePoint, make the changes to that new menu, maybe remove some things, maybe add some custom templates, and then those will be usable in Teams. But we do have to jump out sometimes to do that kind of heavy lifting. Right, but for the most part, our users, we're concerned about creating that single context. All right, so just the general structure here, your team is your group of people. Remember, we talked about channels. Those channels have tabs, which we talked about extending. And then the integration piece that I keep bringing up, that's the apps that we experience on those tabs, or like Jesse mentioned, the Viva connections, which we can experience on the left-hand node. So all of those apps could be SharePoint, could be Planner, Forms, or like you saw, just any old website. All right, so moving right along here. So when do we use which? Let's go through some scenarios. And the idea, as we're going through this section, we've got about 5 minutes here where we're going to just go through scenarios. Start writing down some things, start thinking about questions you have, because the value in today's webinar is that you have an extended Q&A opportunity with us to ask specific questions and to kind of let this be the fuel that gets you thinking, okay, so when should I use which? So keep that question in mind and let's dive in here. Before we do, just some basics here. If you want to remember easily which tool does what, OneDrive is your place, SharePoint is our organization's place, think about broad communication and intranets, and Teams is our group's place. Okay, we can do document management and all, we can collaborate and all, but they do have kind of their primary audience or their primary focus that we can then kind of adjust to suit our needs. All right, so when it comes to documents specifically, we're usually thinking OneDrive or SharePoint. And remember, if I say SharePoint, I'm really saying Teams too. So OneDrive is mine or yours. It's files that mostly you're going to work on, maybe draft up, and maybe at some stage you'd want to move into SharePoint or Teams if it's going to become a permanent team resource. I use it kind of as a staging area. It's not really anything somebody else is going to need. It's mostly for me to get my work done or for an archive that I would reference. But it's not really, I mean, you can share, but it's not really meant for long-term kind of sharing. In those cases, we want to think, okay, so my team is long-term, it's going to stick around for 5 years, but I may go to a different department, I may get a different position. And if that's going to happen and one of your thoughts that crosses your mind is, oh, I'm going to have to move all of this, then chances are it's time to be thinking SharePoint or Teams anyway. Okay. OneDrive, of course, is a business tool, so we want to make sure we're also not putting like iTunes libraries or family photos, no matter how awesome they are, in there. There is OneDrive Personal, though, so be sure to look into that. Now, SharePoint, yeah, it's going to be ours, our shared place where we all have shared control, right? And it's typically if someone were out of the office suddenly, we'd be okay because we've been putting the files that we rely on to do our job in that one place. All right, now when it comes to communication and collaboration, we kind of move beyond just thinking about documents. Even though we have collaboration still, which uses documents, it's a little bit more when we start thinking about Planner and Forms and Stream and all these other tools we might use as well. Now, I'm not going to read you this slide. You'll have access to this and you'll have the recording if you want to dive in a little bit deeper, or if you want to come back into Q&A, I can certainly bring this back up. But just a few examples here. The way this is set up is we have scenarios or needs on the left, and then there are situations where maybe you would just use SharePoint, maybe occasionally with Teams, and then SharePoint definitely without a team. Remember, we can have SharePoint without Teams, but we can't have Teams without SharePoint, and that's why we just see Teams primarily. And then sometimes we'd use both equally. Just kind of depends. We use the Teams for the communication wrapper, and we probably use SharePoint for the broad communication of sharing. Okay, so yeah, won't go through too much of this, but one big thing here is the chat conversations and meetings. Of course, we can't do that in SharePoint or OneDrive. So if you ever need to have a quick chat or set up a meeting or do any kind of scheduling with live events, that's all going to be Teams, of course. That one's a pretty simple one there. When we want that single context, we can kind of do that in SharePoint. In fact, that could be checked here as well. But when I'm thinking about Teams, that's kind of where I want people to go to work because of the communication wrapper. That's a huge benefit because we can achieve something similar in SharePoint. Remember, we can piece it all together. But in Teams, they're going to have the activity node, they're going to have the chat node, and they're going to be able to quickly jump over and answer a chat without getting all disoriented going from a SharePoint site back into Teams. And they have easy access to their calendar and their OneDrive files, all from the left-hand nav. So when I'm thinking about that single context, that seems like a really critical piece to me, is to give people that one-click access to the piece that I'm probably going to be using the most of the day. Okay, let's see. So yeah, if you need website-like or page-based experiences, some people even use SharePoint for like wiki building. You'd probably use SharePoint there. Any kind of documents is always going to be SharePoint, but remember, Teams uses SharePoint, so you may be using Teams exclusively for your documents, but really using SharePoint. And if you're going to be building some kind of mega repository, SharePoint I usually tend to think of as your longer term files, right? Where we're going to be managing these for a long time coming, whereas Teams is going to be maybe more short term. Okay, where we're project based or time based or something, we're not really thinking of Teams as a library for the next 10 years. We're thinking of it as a place we're going to go work. We don't want to clutter that up too much. So at that point, we started thinking, okay, maybe we could use SharePoint for our org-wide resource library. We can come back to that if we need to. You'll also have this slide and the recording to be able to review some of these. Just some more needs with specific solutions. So instead of just which app, what would I do in that app? So for example, the first one, a way to organize my group's content and communications by topic. You could use SharePoint or Teams. If you use SharePoint, you'd probably use Pages, and if you use Teams, you'd use Channels. Okay, a way to share content with people outside your organization. OneDrive, simply share a file. SharePoint, add an external user or share the file. And then Teams, add a guest or share the file. Now, some of this does depend on your organization's setup. So if they've locked down external sharing, of course you won't be able to, but just keep that in mind as you're going through that your organization may have slightly different administrative settings configured. All right, so we'll come back to this again if anybody would like to see it. You will have it as a resource to help you in your decisions. But when you're thinking about it and when you're having conversations with your peers, just remember it's not which app is best. There's not one that makes the most sense to use 100% of the time. Basically, we're trying to understand all three deeply enough so that we can use the best of each or the most appropriate parts of each to maximize our personal productivity and then enhance our collaborative efforts as a team. All right, so yeah, like we said in the beginning, we are going to do extended Q&A, so we've left some time here to make sure that we can get through some of that. While we're listening to Justin, he's going to tell us about that e-training portal. This is a great opportunity to be entering those questions in the Q&A panel and be thinking about those as you're kind of mulling over some of the information from today. I do have some prompts up there as well that we can come back to if we are a little quiet after the video. So, all right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Justin. Thank you, everybody. Please stick around.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. And it looks like we already have a couple of questions in our queue. as it is. So please go ahead and continue to put questions in there. We have the experts available. This is about a 5 to 6 minute video on a new product that Centric has. And if you haven't been introduced to it, I would strongly encourage you to at least check it out. And then we'll get back to Nate and Jesse here towards the end, and Mickey as well, I'm sorry. So yeah, if you could go ahead and hit play on that. Centric can also come in and do some live training for your end users as well. We have an entire adoption framework that we can work through on it. I'll also put a way that you can book some time with me to discuss the e-training portal, as well as Jesse here in the Q&A session, which I'll do in the middle of this video. But yeah, let's go ahead and hit that. It kind of plays whenever it wants to.
Taking its cue from that Teams demo he was trying to do just a minute ago.
Yeah.
I will say real quick for a bit, still on, and you type in Q&A, while Nate did kind of go through the architecture of Teams, and while that seems a little cumbersome or non-intuitive, the actual end user we found that Teams usually fulfills kind of the promise that SharePoint made on collaboration and document sharing about 10 years ago, but never really could fulfill. So we find that Teams usually the adoption is there, and that's kind of your front and center with SharePoint and OneDrive sitting behind that. But yeah, to Nate's point, all that architecture can be a little daunting, but from the end user perspective, it really is fairly intuitive. In fact, Mickey and I are kind of waiting here to see if Outlook is the next thing to get gobbled up by Teams, because no one from Microsoft has said it yet, but we're betting that it's on the horizon if they're not already thinking about it.
Greetings and welcome to the Centric e-training portal. The e-training portal is an end-user-friendly, always up-to-date learning solution for Microsoft 365, Windows, Office, and more. The learning content will improve your team's adoption of new applications, as well as their productivity on the basics, all the way up to solving strategic business issues with Centric's custom content in the portal. Your users will access the portal through this custom Centric Teams app that resides in the app launcher. And then they will use their Office 365 work tenant credentials to access the portal. We're showing this demo today through an administrator view. This is someone designated in your organization to manage your users, assign training, monitor usage, and pull reports. Note that the admin login takes us directly to this company-wide dashboard. This is a great place to go to quickly see user login frequency, popular lessons that are being viewed, any progress on learning paths that have been assigned in the organization, who some of your top learners are, and also see how gamification is going in your organization. This is where your users can have a little friendly competition to earn badges and level up. Next, I'll go to my personal training dashboard. Here's where I can get a quick snapshot of the number of lessons that I have viewed, the courses that I've completed, see this awesome badge that I've been able to earn. I can also take a look at any learning paths that have been assigned to me. My boss assigned me these 3 titles that I have completed, but now I see that there's a new one here for Teams 101 that I need to get started on, and it has a due date of July 3rd. Under active courses, I can see courses and exams that I have completed, but I can also see courses that I have just gotten started on and need to circle back to. So here I can just click this link and pick right up where I left off. I know that I have mentioned the badges and the gamification, so I do want to show the achievements view. This is definitely a place that will be popular with your learners. They can see quick milestones that they've been able to pass and also collect trophies from the different applications that they have tested on within the portal. And most importantly, they can see a leaderboard and see where they stack up next to their teammates. Next, I'll jump into the course library. This is essentially our course catalog, and it's broken down by product area. Today, I'm going to focus on Office 365 because this is where many of our customers are trying to cut down on help desk tickets and empower users. We all know there are a lot of applications within Microsoft 365, and all of the prominent business applications are represented here in the portal. Today, I'm going to select Microsoft Teams. Teams has a lot of functionality, and it is broken down into various sections. So really for Teams or any other course that you choose within this portal, you'll see bigger topics that are broken down into smaller lessons. And as a user is able to progress through these clip or shorter style lessons, they have quizzes to take to make sure that they are retaining the information. So as I scroll down, you'll see that this gets to a pretty granular place where a user can really dig into the details within the functionality. They also have the option to take an exam, and you can assign this to them through learning paths. There is also a cool resource here that I wanted to point out called Starter Guides. So users can download these and they're quick reference guides that they can have to review as kind of a desk side resource. If I click into an actual title, I'll show you the format of the videos. A lot of them are voiceover screen share and have closed captioning. You can expand into theater mode, view the transcript for the video, and also have quick links into previous lessons or follow-on lessons. Within the course library, I'd also like to point out Centric 365. So this tile represents content that we are constantly brainstorming and releasing and updating in-house. And these titles are based upon strategic and productivity-based work scenarios. So instead of learning about one of these applications in isolation, these are really discussing how different apps integrate together. And we give some great examples from businesses and also provide updates from releases from Microsoft. I'd also like to briefly show the administration functionality. So there is a lot of functionality here and it's very easy to use, but this is where you can manage your users, break them down into groups, assign those learning paths that I was talking about, and also create some engagement strategies with some of these other tools. So today I have barely scratched the surface of the functionality of Centric's e-training portal. Your Centric representative can cover more details and answer any questions that you have. Thank you for viewing, and we hope to see you in the portal soon.
Thank you, Nate. And just as a reminder, I put my schedule in here in the Q&A session. So if you want to book time to talk to me more about that and the rest of the adoption framework, then feel free to go ahead and do that. I've also put Jesse's information in there to learn more about some of the services that Oakwood offers as well. So feel free to book time with him also. So Jesse and Nate, I'll turn it back over to you guys for some Q&A, and thank you.
For sure. Yeah, it looks like we had decent traffic there. Nate, do you want to take one or two of these, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, let's start at the top here. Let's see. Can't figure out. Oh, I got that one. Yeah, there we go. Lots of good answers. Let me find a new one here. Yeah, why don't you start, Jesse, while I look? I'll find something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was trying to, Mickey and I were replying to a few of these. We saw a couple questions on Planner. You can do conditional formatting in SharePoint lists, which is really helpful for using lists as like project trackers or red, yellow, green status. Guest user links. Guest user access is a big one for Teams, especially with Skype for Business going away, and you can limit what folks can do on their chats as well as on the call. So you can, let users share to guests, but once the guests have been invited, you can prevent them from doing things like editing their chats or even posting at all if you'd like to. Just make it a shared collaboration space. Yeah, got some booking some time. Had a couple questions around Planner and using that. I know there's at least one of our attendees is out in the PMO, and for for my 2 cents, Planner is a very useful app, but I have seen a lot of folks try to use it in a kind of a pilot or as a tool in the PMO toolbox with mixed results, usually kind of a crash and burn. What I found is the inability to do milestones, resource planning, or kind of task sequence is really difficult. That makes Planner somewhat, it limits its usability for a PMO. Usually folks end up, I see them using things like Basecamp or even licensing Microsoft Project, doing something like that. From the team's perspective, I will say, guys, if it helps for you, if you're kind of evangelizing or just trying to think of a way to contextualize Teams in the course of your everyday usage and some of the other apps that we use, I like to take the example of a status report, a project status report. So as a, say, project manager, using that example again, I might have to do a status report for a project every Friday. So I might start that status report in my OneDrive because right now it's not being shared to anyone besides myself. So I work on it. And then Nate, he has to do the say the issues log and the budget burn rate. So I might throw it into our shared Teams collaboration space for the project, and that way I can be still working on my part of the project report, status report, while he is doing the budget burn rate. And then once we're done, Justin might be, say, the leader of the PMO or the CFO. He likes to read over all the project status reports in a centralized SharePoint site on Friday afternoon. So we all upload all of our status reports when we're done from Teams into SharePoint. So you can kind of see on a document lifecycle how you can use these apps in a, hopefully a fairly easy to understand example there.
Yeah, all right. And then I did see a couple questions in there that were really, I mean, they're all really good, but there's a couple in there that are kind of hanging out. One was about the planner again and thinking about the project management. And Mickey mentioned something that's really great to consider. I'm going to pull up my, oh, not that, the other one moment. There we go. So I'm in my demo environment again, and somebody asked about using Planner and if it'll ever get like actual start, actual end, that kind of thing. And Mickey had a really good suggestion that while Planner may be lighter and doesn't have those fields now, and it's not currently on the roadmap to be developed, you could use Microsoft List or SharePoint to achieve something similar. So in SharePoint, I'll just show you real quick how you might get started with that. We're not going to get too deep into this, but I just wanted you to kind of see the way you'd go about it. But in SharePoint, we create a new list. And there's some really great starting places here. So thinking about your projects, maybe we want to do like work progress tracker. Okay, so we're just going to use this template. We'll go ahead and create it. And the reason we go this route is because unlike Planner, we can customize these fields. We can change the category options. We can change the name of the start date, due date. We can add, like you asked, the actual start date, actual end date, and then combining that with setting up rules or reminders. As long as we have a date field, you get this set a reminder option. So we can set a reminder in the start or due date, or we can create rules like the little personal notifications, or get even heavier with it and use Power Automate to throw in things like approvals and different kinds of M365 integrations as well. So while Planner may not be the best for all project management, you can always use something custom like a list to get it really granularly close to what you want in the end there.
Yep.
There's one other question. Somebody asked about how to open 2 sessions of Teams desktop and mentioned that at one point I mentioned that you could shift click, and at one point you could, so I'm sad to report that that's no longer an option. You can still use, just so everybody kind of generally knows, on most applications you can shift click on a taskbar icon. You could try it like OneNote or most apps, and then open up a second instance. So you can have, in OneNote's example, 2 notebooks open side by side. Sadly, in Teams that just won't work. And I think it's because the experience of Teams takes up so much real estate that if you did do like a screen split on just a standard screen, you wouldn't really be able to see too much. So I wonder if that's why we don't have that same ability there.
It's also completely possible, Nate, that Microsoft just thought that worked too well for everybody and take it away.
That could be.
Yeah.
All right, what other questions do we have? Or Jesse, was there one that stood out to you want to cover?
I think we hit most of them, and we're coming up on time. Guys, if you do have any follow-up questions, even, if it's how can I do this certain rule, or what would you do with this planner that I'm struggling with, or if you got more kind of high-level questions like how would I plan for a Teams deployment, or I need to move off my file shares and do some move that into SharePoint and Teams. Those are the kind of things that Nate and myself, our teams, are here to help with. So please don't hesitate to reach out. My team, the Oakwood 365 team of experts, does things all the way from very down in the weeds OneNote and SharePoint questions, all the way up through a full kind of tenant review that takes us a couple of days to kind of make sure that your tenant security and your licensing is in line with your business objectives and you're saving amount of money, but not also like cutting yourself short on any of that pieces. So, and like I said, I know Centric, you guys have also all of that kind of stuff from the very down in the weeds to the very high level scope. So please feel free to reach out to us because we're happy to help. I don't have anything else though, Justin and Nate.
Awesome. Well, I do want to thank everybody who's still on the line there. So thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I hope you picked up a few new ideas perhaps about OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. Just like Jesse said, if you do have additional questions, you know where we are. Our contact information is on the screen, and you can watch for a link to the recording probably tomorrow, I would guess. But thank you everybody so much for your time. Have a great rest of your week.